What a lot of people. That's really, really good. And that worked, didn't it? So that's fun. So, like many of you, as has been confirmed, I'm enjoying volunteering for HOS. Retirement gave me a bit more time, and it was my privilege last year to lead the survey of woodlarks across the New Forest last year. The survey was commissioned by Forestry England. That's on behalf of the wider partnership of organisations that manage the New Forest. And the reason for that is that the woodlark is considered to be one of a number of what we might call indicator species, so the species which tell us whether or not the New Forest is being managed effectively, whether those species are doing well or not. Good, it works. So, bit of audience participation. You're good at that. I've seen lots of hands going up. So if you are familiar with the woodlark song, and I've just played a bit of that, and the bird itself, can you raise your hand? Fantastic. Lots of hands. Some not, and that's not to be, that's not unusual. I wouldn't expect everybody to be familiar with it. Hands up if you actually helped with last year's woodlark survey. A smaller number, but thanks very much for those of you who did. Hands up if you're helping with this year's wader survey. Again, this is a bit New Forest specific, but are you doing the wader survey? A bit more tricky, isn't it? Not quite the appeal that the woodlark had. What about help with any HOS surveys in the past? Again, fantastic, good number. Hands up if you feel a bit left out. I hope that this morning I can just encourage those of you who have helped and those of you who haven't. They're not always very, very easy, and I'd say woodlark was sort of medium hard, but they can be incredibly rewarding and really enjoyable. Certainly we try and make it as easy as possible for you. So, woodlarks, they're small. They're well camouflaged. They're about sparrow size, and they sort of shuffle around on the ground. They're quite unobtrusive. The song, it seems to me that they've got two volumes. Either it's loud or it's incredibly quiet. When they're singing, they're a bit like skylarks, so they're right up high in the sky. And there was at least one occasion where I picked up a woodlark that was singing, which I proved then was 600 metres away. And it was actually on the other side of the A31, so those shrill notes were carrying across the noise of the traffic to where I was. But then I was reminded just a couple of weeks ago, actually, that you can hear one singing, and it's really faint, and you think, it must be a long, long way away, and you kind of think, where is it? And then you take one step further forwards, and it just flies off from immediately in front of you. Because they will sing maybe to each other really, really quietly and allow quite close approach. So they're easily missed. It also, we had 300 thereabouts, 1 kilometre squares to cross the New Forest to cover, quite a large area. It rained an awful lot. I don't know if you remember, but one month we had double the sort of expected rainfall, and the next month we had like 50% more. It was very, very wet. Those dry heathlands that woodlarks are supposed to like were actually very, very wet. But we had over 100 HOS volunteers. So when the good weather came, we were able to make best use of those. It was a great piece of teamwork. The habitats they like, well, actually in the winter, they're in farmland areas. So probably a lot of them move off the core of the New Forest into surrounding land. Not very far away, we think, maybe just a few miles. But then in the spring, they come to the New Forest to breed, and other areas across the county as well. But this was a New Forest survey. So they like this kind of really short grazed sward. They've got short legs and they shuffle around and they pick up insects and things from the ground. And that quite often created through the grazing of the animals, so the cattle and the ponies that are out there. And they need a few trees as well. The key is in the name, I guess, woodlark. So, they'll sit in the trees as a lookout post, and they'll actually sing from those trees as well. And those kind of environments are either what you might call the sort of long-standing open heathland areas across the New Forest, of which, that they're really very extensive. Or they could be some of the plantations which have been felled quite some years ago, which are now becoming really, really good, as in case as the picture behind me at the moment. So that was a plantation, and the ride is just ideal, and the areas where the trees used to be is ideal, and those are great areas for woodlarks. There's also a number of very recently felled areas which have yet to develop the vegetation, but the woodlarks seem to like those as well. Thought it was worth putting in this one. Let me just check that I'm in the right place. I am. So that little blue arrow there is pointing to a nest. I've never seen a woodlark nest. Maybe somebody can show me one day. I'd love that. But all they need is this little sort of scrappy bit of bracken or heather in amongst that short grazed turf, and there they can put their nest. So they return from the farmland maybe January, February, and by the end of March they're laying eggs in these little clumps of vegetation, and usually manage maybe a couple of broods during the year. Just to briefly come back onto the habitat. So you'll know that in the New Forest there's a programme of controlled burning. And the woodlarks really benefit from that, because if you didn't do that or cut the bracken and the heather back, then over time it would become more and more and more overgrown with quite leggy gorse and quite tall, leggy heather and tall gorse, which wouldn't do them any favours. So they benefit from that cycle of burning, and then the vegetation comes back over time. I have to say that this photo I took of the bird that was singing really quietly just a couple of weeks ago. So it's in that photo. You never know where, and I'm not going to bother trying to point it out to you because it's not very exciting. But that kind of environment, you might think it looks pretty scruffy, but it's great for these birds. And just in case you're wondering, there's no trees in that photo, but there were trees behind me. So it was an ideal place for them. How we surveyed, really briefly, 300 squares, 2 survey periods, a minimum of 1 visit for each of those surveys periods. On nice, calm days, that was a bit of a challenge, but we found some. And obviously we recorded all of the species all of the woodlarks that we found. Now those survey methods are the same as was used in the previous 2 surveys, and that's quite important when you're comparing population size from one survey to the next. As you'll see a bit later on, we did also collate any additional reports. When the surveyors were way away from their own squares, or when people who weren't connected with the survey spotted them, heard them singing, we managed to collate quite a few records from those people as well. It's become the norm for us to set up a little website, so it's easy for you to choose the square, provide your contact details, and then there's just as soon as your square has been confirmed, then you can download a recording form with a map of your square in it. It works really well. And in this instance, I'm just showing what it would look like if you were volunteering to do this particular square just west of Fritham, square SU 2113. And a little while later, Colin Johnson is out there, and I reckon he deserves a prize for having the best handwriting and the best choice of nice, clear, felt-tip pen. That's a hint for those who are helping out with this year's Wader survey. And And sure, see where the blue arrow is, you can see a little W and a male-female thing. He found a pair of woodlarks up in White Shoot Bottom in the corner of his survey square. His second visit, oops, there you go. Was I showing? I'm right, am I? There you go. Anyway, we're all right. His second visit, at this stage he either learnt to use a colour printer or chosen to do so. And he had a bird carrying food. Hint that there's a nest nearby probably, and a calling bird. There's a W that's underlined there. Just use these simple notations to make it easy to jot things down. So that's a sort of confirmation, if you like, that there was indeed a territory in that corner of his square. It's on the edge of the square, so we do have to be careful. There's a risk of double counting if the person who was surveying the square next door also had birds. Maybe there would be a risk that we double count there. But checked. So Jan and Phil doing the square next door. Also nicely, clearly written form. They managed to get all 3 visits on the same form using different colours. That worked well. And within their square, they had maybe 3 or more territories, so that was a good result. But in fact, they were also able to see that next door, back in Collins Square, they also had woodlarks feeding there. So, if you like, that was double confirmation that that pair in White Shoot Bottom was definitely resident there. And I had the pleasure of working through all of the reports in this way. You can imagine there's a whole stack of them with Andy Page, good long morning, sat at the computer just flicking through and marking up and finding out, if you like, the grid references for each of those territories. How many were there? Well, within the target area, so within the New Forest, the sort of green and mushy brown sort of colour there, that's what's known as the Special Protection Area, the SPA. And that's what we'd been asked to survey. It's land which is mostly managed by Forestry England. There are some areas marked there which are managed by Hampshire County Council, National Trust, Wellow Parish Council. There's 1 or 2 private owners as well. But the grand total of woodlark territories across that target area was 324. And as you'll see in a minute, that's a lot compared to previous years. Outside of the SPA, 19 territories. Roydon Woods, Badminton Common, Foxbury, Hyde Common, and Burton Common. Those are all areas that we knew there would be some woodlarks, so we asked surveyors to cover those as well, Roydon Woods as well. And we probably also missed other birds, some of those birds that winter on the farmland, some of them actually stay within farmland areas, perhaps increasingly so in recent years. We didn't try and cover farmland, so those ones we probably missed. But the target areas we did find birds within those. So that 324 territories was made up of 260 using the same methodology as the 2 previous surveys, as I mentioned earlier on. So that's surveyors within their own squares, checking those 3 survey visits. But an additional 64 territories that came in, if you like, outside of that methodology, when people all were away from their squares, or random people said, hey, I had a woodlark singing and this is where it was, and it wasn't one we'd already recorded in the surveys. So previous surveys, quite possibly they were underestimates because they didn't collate those extra ones. But whichever way you look at it, last year was a good year for woodlarks in the New Forest. Where were they? Which habitats did they prefer? Well, again, as I hinted earlier on, they were on the edges of heathland. So that's, if you like, those long-standing heathland areas. You can see that the red dots, that are around the edges of the brown. So the brown is the heathland, the green is the woodland. So there's a very much of a tendency for a big block of heathland, no trees in the middle, so they're not interested in that, but all the way on the outside, that's where you find the woodlarks that are actually breeding. There's some sort of long re-established heathland. So one of the areas on there is Longdown enclosure. So where I've put where heathland has been re-established, you can see that there's some pairs there. So the trees have been felled, a bit like the photograph I showed you earlier on. Habitat is now really good for them, so there are woodlarks there. And then the yellow on the map is those plantations that have been felled in the last 5 years since the last survey. So we had a number of woodlarks in that area as well. So why? Why more than ever before? Well, I've highlighted two reasons that we think are the main reasons. One being that there's more breeding habitat, and the other that there's good winter survival. So on the breeding habitat front, there's probably three main drivers for that. So that ongoing management of the habitats is important for woodlarks. The newly created heathland, again, is bringing them an extra area each time that happens. And then heavier grazing. I don't know whether you follow the numbers of animals that are out there grazing the New Forest, but I have, in part because of my previous work. But I looked it up. So ponies, historically, they were probably less than 4,000. So pre-2005, maybe up to 4,000 ponies out there each year. And it's about 5,500 now. Cattle, they're only out there for part of the year, so you could debate as to how much impact they have, but traditionally 2,000-3,000 cattle grazing in the New Forest, probably about 4,000 now, but in fact they peaked at about 8,000 or 9,000 in 2019 and 20. So there's been an increase in grazing in recent years, which has probably helped to keep the vegetation sort of tight to the ground, which happens to be good for woodlarks. The winter survival, well, as I mentioned, they're not migrants. They're not going off to Africa. They're staying mostly locally, so they're susceptible to cold weather. But we've had about 10 years now of mild winters, milder than average winters. So we think that's one of the reasons why there's more coming back to nest in the New Forest each year. So nearly done. It's good news, at least for woodlarks. It is but one of those indicator species. I know we've got, as Chris was saying, we've got little direct control over the climate and the weather, and it's debatable as to whether a run of 10 mild winters is actually a good thing or not. But coincidentally, it has been good for woodlarks, and the management of the habitat seems to be helping, and that's despite the fact that woodlarks are ground nesting birds, and all of the threats for disturbance and predation that brings. So I think it's something to celebrate amongst all of the bad news stories that we wake up to and see on our news channels each day, each week. It's good that the woodlarks have done well. My last slide, I'm on that HOS Surveys stand. Do come and say hello. So that's whether you've helped with past surveys, whether you're helping with some of the ongoing surveys, in particular the waders survey. It would be great to put a face to the name that I've got on my spreadsheets, my lists. Keith, am I allowed to mention the house martin survey? Have we got time for that? Briefly, I'm told. We are launching effectively today a project to do with house martins. Maybe one day we'll be able to give away some artificial nest cups to boost the survival of the nestlings, to boost the breeding success of the colonies that are within Hampshire. But to start with, you've got to find out where they are. So there's a website that we've set up. Members of the public and you yourselves can report where you see house martins. But we'd also like to have a number of people spread throughout the whole county who will be able to respond. So when a member of the public says they've seen a nest site, there's 2 nests there, I saw them as I was going by, we would like to contact somebody from Hoss who lives nearby, who would then go out a couple of times later in the year and check that nest site, gather a bit more information and feed it in. So if you think you can help with that, please come and see us at the Hoss survey stand, and we'll just add your name to the list. We can put a red dot on our map, really important. If you want to be kept informed of next surveys, come and have a chat. Thank you very much.